You're listening to Southpod, Rise of a Region, hosted by Stanfield Gray and John Yarian.
Welcome to Southpod. I'm John Yarian, your host, and we are here as always to talk to the funders, founders, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are making things happen in the American South. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Cliff Oxford, who's done a lot of interesting stuff. What you probably know him from is the Oxford Entrepreneur Center. Cliff, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. This is getting to talk about entrepreneurs is one of my favorite things to do. So thanks for inviting me.
Of course. And I want to begin with a guess that as a child, you didn't imagine, as a young man running around the yard, you didn't think, God, someday when I grow up, I'm going to found a center for entrepreneurs. That is my dream. As a young man, I'm going to go on and do that. That probably wasn't the earliest memory you have of your professional aspirations. Is that true?
Yeah, running around in our yard, I was probably trying to avoid the alligators and rattlesnakes. I grew up in the Swamp Road, Okefenokee Swamp. So, no, that wasn't top of mind, I have to say.
What did you think you were going to do as you were growing up, as you got into high school, maybe into college? What did you imagine back then?
Well, it's actually an interesting question because of this, and it's actually a complicated question with a complicated answer, but I'll simplify it. Growing up really in a rural setting like that, out in the middle of nowhere.
And where are we, by the way?
I grew up in southern Georgia.
Southern Georgia, okay.
Literally in the Okefenokee Refuge.
Okay.
I mean, we were inside the swamp.
Serious Southern credentials, by the way. I love that. That is bona fide. Thank you. Good.
But, a subculture like that, I think I was on the path to do what everybody else does. Growing up, I was going to graduate from high school and get a job so I could hunt and fish every day. The aspirations was probably a double-wide trailer at one time.
What were the jobs around there? What were people doing? What did people do for a living? What were the jobs around there? What did people do?
That's now there's not many jobs at all in something like that. You kind of subsist in an area like that now, and it's we could go on and talk about the meth epidemic for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Because of that, drugs now are worse in the rural areas than they are in the inner cities, mainly because there's not any jobs.
Right.
But people down there, they figure out to do something, and it is not a career. You don't have. That's not what a job is for. So. I guess I was on that path. I was, growing up in that culture. When you're not exposed, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And people shouldn't criticize people who have not had the exposure because they just don't know. So, but something hit me around 15 or 16. I was really fascinated. We went to Atlanta, and I was really fascinated with Atlanta. We went to the state capitol. I was fascinated with that. Nobody knew about entrepreneurship down there, so I don't even know if we knew what the word entrepreneur meant. But I knew something hit me that I wanted to go on to college and see what else was out there. So it was a natural fascination, and also I did have a dad that said, you need to get out here. You got to go get an education. So there was some urging there. So it was. I guess I would have to say to you, it hit me that I wanted to leave Waycross. And had a fascination that there was more to life than hunting and fishing.
Well, what I'm hearing is kind of a natural curiosity, right?
Yeah, it was a curiosity. Yes.
I want to pause here because you've spent a lot of time and have looked very deeply at the qualities and characteristics of entrepreneurship. How would you talk about curiosity as maybe even a precondition, maybe a requirement for entrepreneurs? Is that something you look for that you find in others? I mean, how do you think about that?
It's a dominant attribute. People ask me, what do I need to be an entrepreneur? What does it take? And I go, be curious, well-read, and don't quit. So curiosity is one of my top three.
Yeah. In my experience, it either is or isn't. I've never talked somebody into becoming curious. They already are, or that's one of those innate qualities. So here's this curious young man who just wandered straight out of a swamp. He's off to higher education. He wants to know more and see the world around him. What was that like for you through college and as you started to really self-select and consume all these possibilities and things that could be?
Well, when I got off to college, and the first thing I had to do was make it through remedial English and remedial math. Went to a very substandard school system down in southern Georgia.
You had to catch up before you could get anywhere first, right?
Yeah, I had too many double negatives. I had all kinds of problems. And in fact, Professor Sanders, asked to see me after class, and she says, I don't think there's much hope here. You just got too much slang. I don't know if you can, if there's a remedial course for you. And it was pretty bad. And I jump ahead, the first article I wrote as a writer for the New York Times, opened up the mail one day, and there's a letter from Martha Sanders. And she had gone through and marked it up. She had found
still helpful. Yeah.
She had found some not grammar mistake, some kind of mistake. I forget what. I think it was apostrophe or something. But she said this shows what education can do. A person couldn't even write a sentence. I had written an article for the New York Times that had become the second most read business article that year. So, but as I got through English, I began to excel. I definitely excelled at college, and I found, there's a natural ability to organize people, natural ability that people would follow areas I wanted to go. I really started on the national debate team that had won the national championship the year before. I started competing at Dartmouth, Chapel Hill. So there definitely took off with some fine tuning that had to do.
Sure. So by now, listeners are sitting here thinking, okay, this is kind of the, kind of rags to riches. This is the Southern boy makes good story. This is this linear progression from nothing to something. And I would submit that there are a few more twists and turns in the story. It's not such a predictable pattern. But before we get into that middle part, maybe tell us a little bit about what has become. So as we talk here today, you've just broken some news. By the time this podcast is available, it'll be, a couple weeks old, but help orient us to the present day, to the Oxford Entrepreneur Center and what you've just announced.
Yeah, well, the big news, and this is one of the highlights of a career that's had up and downs like everybody's, but this is definitely the mountaintop. Lauren Feldman, who's the entrepreneur editor at Forbes online and the print version, is coming to join us as editor-in-chief for the Oxford Center. Lauren had been my editor at the New York Times. He graduated from Wharton and went to Fast Company, and I'm not in among entrepreneurial circles, he's considered the best we got, because Lauren was not always just interested in a Silicon Valley unicorn. Lauren was totally fascinated with an entrepreneur selling swimming pools. And you may be too young for this, but he's the Walter Cronkite of entrepreneur journalism. And have him and come and work beside Lauren, I feel like I'm 25 again. I really do. Because it's going to be so many adventures ahead of us.
Yeah.
So that's the Lauren story, and that's going to be put out on the wire in about 15 minutes.
Woo! We're time traveling here. We're ahead of the curve. So build out for us, though. Help listeners understand what the Oxford Entrepreneur Center is. What is this esteemed voice joining you in?
And to give you 10 seconds before that to set it up properly, the Oxford Entrepreneur Center is everything. As far as my contribution, is a accumulation of everything I've done before then, and that included an unbelievable opportunity to be in the whole technology revolution at UPS, moving a truck driving company to a technology powerhouse. When I left there as national field support manager in IT, I started my own company, which from scratch we grew to about 700 people. And then selling that, I went to Emory, and probably being on the Emory faculty was not the perfect job for me as a disruptive entrepreneur. But what the Oxford Center is, but I learned a lot at Emory. I learned a lot from there, and I learned about the academia, and I learned a lot starting my own company. I learned a lot working for a Fortune 100 company. So you put all that together, and that started the Oxford Center. And I actually started Oxford at Emory when I was at Emory University. That's what the first 2 years, everything was held at Emory. And what I wanted to do was, there's plenty of places for startups to go. There's plenty of places for corporations to go. But when I was building my company, from hyper growth to human scale, and that means we get to a point where we can add people and add profits. That was the dicey part. And oh, by the way, there was nothing on it. I mean, what do you look for in a number two when you're growing? Well, guess what? The whole world tells you to do the wrong thing. Go to a big company and find somebody running $100 million division and have them come. Those are the biggest disasters that I deal with when an entrepreneur does that. They come in, they try to replace the culture, blah, blah, blah. So we saw that there was just zero on the most dicey, fastest part of entrepreneurship. There was nothing clinical. When do you hire a CFO? How do you build a national sales team? So that's what we set out to do at Oxford Center. And the Oxford Center was always about the content and the events and to get the entrepreneur hypergrowth to human scale.
Well, and I want to stop you for a second. This is what I was hinting at earlier. When you think about this rags to riches story, it's supposed to just end with riches. That's the end, right? You sell a company, you turn into, kind of a hobby investor, you put your feet up. What you're talking about that began at Emory, that has become the Oxford Entrepreneur Center, has this whiff of altruism in it. Like you're giving back, like you've got a responsibility, like there's something in you that wants to help others that maybe doesn't come from exactly the same place as an entrepreneur who's just looking to cash out. Is that fair, or am I projecting that onto you?
No, I think that's very accurate. I believe in the servant leadership model. And I think this is an extension of the servant leadership model too. People always ask me, why didn't you make it a nonprofit? And I go, well, putting the first $3 million in, it was a nonprofit, accounting wise. And we didn't worry about that because what gets us excited every morning, getting up and writing a blog every morning that's read by entrepreneurs everywhere, including Mark Cuban and David Karp of Tumblr, to entrepreneurs down in southern Georgia, is that we're here. What gets us excited is to elevate entrepreneurs. 2 words: elevate entrepreneurs. I don't even know if we're here to educate entrepreneurs. I know that would be the typical way of saying it, but we're here to get them to the next level. So, and
why not use that word? What's wrong with educate? Why not use educate? Well,
educate, there's a lot of places they can find education for entrepreneurs. And it's a little preachy, by the way. I'm going to educate you. And that's putting yourself above them. When we say elevate entrepreneurs, we're putting the entrepreneurs ahead of us. So we figured out how to communicate with fast growth entrepreneurs, not startups, not corporate, but fast growth entrepreneurs. What we did well was we figured out how to and communicate with them. And the first thing is, you don't want to be, for lack of a better word, preachy with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know better than you.
Mm-hmm.
So we prefer elevate entrepreneurs.
Sure. So why, and I'm interested in this middle piece of the story. There's this UPS, this extremely successful stint with UPS, where, like you said, we transitioned from a truck company to a leading edge technology company.
Yep.
You found a company that's extremely successful. And then you mentioned heading to Emory. Help me understand that decision. Like, why not just wash, rinse, and repeat? Why not start other companies or just sit on a bunch of boards? What brought you back to an Institute of Higher Learning, which, by the way, connects back to the beginning of the story? Here's this kid who thinks there's more in the world and comes out of the swamp and goes to college. And it seems like, jump ahead 20, 25 years, whatever it is, you're headed right back to campus. Why is that?
Well, from my own experience, I knew education could be transformational for students. So I really wanted to give back to that. Emory, quite frankly, changed my life. I mean, it was the exposure to the world. My Emory students that when I was a student, those students changed my life. Just being on campus with someone whose parents had gone to Columbia.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. So it was a dedication to Emory and what they had done. I endowed the MBA program. So I wanted to go and be there with that endowment. But my big thing was, I went to Emory and I was too much of a disruptor, because I went to Emory and said, 2003, and said, there's an entrepreneurial wave coming, and we need to position the university for entrepreneurship. And now what I was naive about was academic politics. I was very naive about that and thinking, and I just had a big success. And as Bill Gates said, success is a lousy teacher.
Yeah.
I thought I could just go to Emory and be successful.
Yeah.
And I could drive through it. So that's a reason. The reason I didn't go start another company is because, and I've written about this in the New York Times, that there ain't, balance, there ain't none. That was a big 2 words we used to use in Waycross. Ain't none. Isn't that a beauty? I mean, if you think about it, you have to really,
yeah.
When I was building my company, my children made sacrifices, my family made sacrifices, and it wasn't because I wanted to be at work at 9:30 at night. But if you wanted to get it done, that was the way we found to get it done. So I had made the decision that was a lot of fun, but I don't want to have that much fun again. So, now, where I love Emory, and Emory's a great school, but my time there was not that great with the faculty. So, there's home runs and there's strikeouts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I left Emory, and that was a great thing. It turned out we made that a good thing. It was not a good thing to leave Emory. It wasn't pretty, but
Yeah.
I took and said, look, I'll just take it to the world. I can't give it to Emory. I'll give it to the world. I tried the investment deal. I was going to be a venture capitalist.
Oh yeah.
And I was one of the worst. I mean, I would go into a board meeting and go, why are we talking about all this stuff? Why don't we just go do it?
Oh yeah. No, they don't like that.
They don't like that at all. I would classify myself as a terrible venture capitalist.
Yeah, that's awful if that's what you're doing. Hey, real quickly before we leave higher education, there are undoubtedly hundreds of podcasts being recorded right now as we speak with people talking about entrepreneurial activities and starting businesses. And a lot of them are saying, hey, you know what? College doesn't really matter that much. This whole 4-year, liberal arts academic thing, it's don't bother with it. Go to code camp or just skip it altogether. What do you say to that? What's your thought on if somebody is in high school listening to this and they've got a drive to start something? Should they pay tuition and move into a dorm or what?
I have written about this, and I've been very outspoken about it.
Yeah.
Because, for a Cliff Oxford in the swamp, and for many students, especially first-generation college students, what a terrible piece of advice people are saying about that. It just really irks me that some people would say that. And oh, by the way, I mean, if your parents have gone to college and you've gone to Woodward Academy and or a private school, and your family's got tremendous connections, I would say I still recommend you to go, but I can kind of understand it. My children were fortunate to go to private school, and the connections they had at the private school were unbelievable. But I still told my son that, and he brought this up. I mean, he told me, why do I need to go to college?
Yeah.
And through a couple of big battles, his mother and I finally won. And thank goodness we're getting in striking distance of graduation here.
Well, it's funny. I was in high school in the 90s, which is a long time ago now, and am third generation college educated. So for me, not going to college would be like not getting a driver's license. Like there was no question, and nobody in my peer group, like you were going to go somewhere. And it's interesting to see that shift, particularly among multi-generational college-educated families where you have young people who can download podcasts and read magazines and surf the internet, and they're coming downstairs and telling mom and dad, hey, I don't think I need to do this. A lot of smart people are telling me I don't need to bother with this. It's very different now than it was even 10, 15 years ago.
Very different. I just met an entrepreneur, Frank Bailey, and he graduated from high school, and he went and became a real estate broker. And what a fine young man that was, just a fine young man. And he said, college wasn't for me. I wanted to go sell houses.
Yep.
Okay, I can deal with that. So I'm not being a snob here and saying everybody's got to go to college, but certainly for 90% of the students, college is transformational.
Well, one thing I wonder about with young people, it doesn't have to be college, but what I wonder is where are you going to get, the time to really grow the ability to think and work deeply? Where are you going to get the discipline? where you're going to get, maybe you got all of that at home. Maybe you can get it someplace else. But I meet very few, and I meet some very, very smart 18, 19-year-olds, some of them with great ideas. A lot of them need to build discipline. They need to learn how to sit in a chair and work on something for more than 30 minutes.
Yeah, very true. And, when I say we say college, I would put the armed services in that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's a space.
I would put, if you want to be a welder, go and be the best welder in the world.
Yeah.
Go be the best welder in the world. But, I think there was a thread of entrepreneurship. Oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, so I don't need that. I don't need college.
So back to the through line of the narrative here, which kind of sounded like rags to riches, but what we've learned, it was like riches to academia, which was sort of a debacle. There was an exploration with venture capital that maybe didn't go that great. Then, as you put it, you took it out into the world, right? So you've got this vision that you brought out of Emory. Maybe spend a minute on that, on what the Oxford Entrepreneur Center became as it kind of freed itself from the restraints of an institutional environment and took on the shape of what I think you really envisioned.
We did free ourselves of the restraints of an academic environment, but we also rid ourselves of a great brand called Emory.
Yeah.
And that was a little worrisome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who in the heck is Oxford Entrepreneurs? And, I've seen this in business so many times. You got to go out there and make some hay and make your luck. And the thing that helped us, and it was bigger than Emory, was when the New York Times asked me to write on entrepreneurship. When I had the New York Times and had a platform there, and it was the content of our platform. It wasn't just, well, I'm a writer at the New York Times. That's okay. But when we started putting out our content on the New York Times platform, that was a big, big change.
Yeah.
That really gave us a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
So there's a lesson there for entrepreneurs, brand association.
Sure.
And we had to work like crazy to write for the New York. We had to get it approved, the editorial board. The lesson there, I went up when they were looking at me, it was this guy from Atlanta. Oh, you're a red state guy, blah, blah, blah. And I went to the New York Times and said, you need me more than I need you. How many, when I run through my Atlanta neighborhood, how many New York Times do I see at the end of the driveway? What's your subscription rate in the Southeast? Yeah. So maybe I could bring a perspective that will help you. Mm-hmm. And, everybody else was going to the New York Times. Oh, it's my lifelong dream to work for the New York Times. Well, they hear that from everybody. And my point to them was, you need me more. You need me more than I need you, and I really like you, and I really want to be with you, but so that was a very, very big interview, and so we went out there and we got some traction with the New York Times. We found an underserved customer, and that was the entrepreneur between hypergrowth and human scale. And, then we started getting some dynamite members. Our conference in New York was a game changer at the New York Times Center. We had a national conference there. So, we had some luck and we made some luck, but definitely the New York Times things was big after Emory. You asked specifically after Emory, it was New York Times. And then Forbes came to me and said, we want you to do a daily column, which turned into the morning report, which we send out every day. And, it went from there. And the gentleman who's joining us, Lauren Feldman, had the same shared values as we did. Let's elevate entrepreneurs. So Lauren was a big help. they were just a big help.
Yeah. Well, Cliff, as we wind down here, give us some URLs, some links. Where can people go to consume more of this content, to hear more from you, to get access to the Entrepreneur Center? Where should they go?
Yeah, oxfordcenter.com.
Okay.
Now, as you know, you probably know this. April the 6th, I sold Oxford Center to Advantage Media ForbesBooks, and I did that to it gave me access to talent like Lauren, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's going to be an Oxford ForbesBooks platform. So it's great for our members. And, you know, we do help. A big part of this is we help companies sell their companies. We were just different. We tried to talk them out of not selling instead of into selling. 9 times out of 10, we did that. But so to get oxfordcenter.com, go there. You can always send me an email at cliff@oxfordcenter.com. If an entrepreneur wants the morning report, they can go to oxfordcenter.com and go to infos and sign up. So oxfordcenter.com or cliff@oxfordcenter.com both work very well.
Well, obviously lots more for our listeners to discover. Cliff, you've written a bunch, you've been interviewed a bunch, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. But I will say congrats on the announcement and congrats on all the success. And I'm excited to be with somebody who's come a long way from the swamp. Thank you very much. Cliff Oxford.
Thank you for listening to Southpod, Rise of a Region, where innovators dish on success, failure, and a rapidly evolving South.